Hi everyone, this is Mark, and today we're talking about confronting America's health crisis. America spends more on healthcare than any nation, yet it ranks last in health outcomes among developed countries. This paradox sits at the heart of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s mission as Secretary of Health and Human Services. The problem runs deeper than most realize. Kennedy points to a specific historical moment when America's health dramatically declined. It wasn't a virus, a new environmental toxin, or a corpse. By the mid 1990s, the two biggest food companies in the world were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. Kennedy explains this wasn't a coincidence. It was calculated. As tobacco companies faced mounting litigation and declining cigarette sales in the late 1980s, they didn't just diversify, they transformed the American food system using the same playbook that made cigarettes irresistible. The tobacco industry didn't merely purchase food companies, they transferred their expertise in addiction from cigarettes to food products. Scientists who had spent decades making tobacco more addictive were reassigned to food laboratories. Their mission: create food products that override the body's natural satiety signals. These scientists developed chemical compounds that mimic natural flavors without providing actual nutrition. The result was a new category of products Kennedy describes as food-like substances rather than actual food. Kennedy notes, you're eating and you're not getting any nutrients, and you're not releasing any GLP-1. You're not getting any satisfaction. This explains the phenomenon doctors had never seen before in human history: obesity coupled with malnutrition. People consume enormous quantities of calories yet remain malnourished at the cellular level. Desperate for nutrients, their bodies keep signaling hunger despite excess caloric intake. How could this happen in a country with robust regulatory agencies designed to protect public health? Kennedy's answer is direct: corruption. My uncle Ted Kennedy conducted hearings in 1970 about agency capture at the FDA, Kennedy reveals. That hearing concludes that the FDA was no longer serving the public interest or health. It had ceased being a public health agency. The problem has only worsened in the decades since. One glaring example is the GRAS, generally recognized as safe, loophole that allows food companies to reintroduce new chemicals into the food supply without FDA approval. Kennedy addresses this loophole directly, stating that for far too long, ingredient manufacturers and sponsors have exploited a loophole that has allowed new ingredients and chemicals, often with unknown safety data, to be introduced into the U.S. food supply without notification to the FDA or the public. The statistics are shocking. Nearly 99% of new chemicals used in food or food packaging since 2000 were approved not by the FDA, but by the food and chemical industry itself. Meanwhile, these ultra-processed foods now comprise more than half of the calories the average American adult consumes. The mechanism of regulatory capture operates through multiple channels, but one of the most pernicious is the revolving door between government agencies and the industries they regulate. 7 of the 8 recent FDA commissioners have immediately gone to work for industry, Kennedy points out. The pattern extends beyond the commissioner's level. Division and branch chiefs within agencies often spend their final years before retirement doing favors for the industries where they plan to land lucrative positions. This creates a culture throughout the agency where serving industry interests become normalized. The corruption extends to how science itself is conducted and published. Kennedy notes that pharmaceutical companies effectively control major medical journals through advertising dollars and purchasing reprints of favorable studies. Richard Horton, who was the head of the Lancet, says, yeah, we're no longer science journals. We are about promoting pharmaceutical products, and that's what we do. The corruption extends beyond regulatory agencies to the media outlets Americans rely on for health information. Kennedy recounts a conversation with former Fox News CEO Roger Ailes, who said 75% of his advertising revenues on the evening news division were pharmaceutical ads. 75%. This creates an obvious conflict of interest. News anchors whose salaries depend on pharmaceutical advertising dollars cannot freely report on issues that might threaten those revenue streams. If you look at these news shows, 60 Minutes or even Anderson Cooper or Sanjay Gupta 20 years ago, they were saying, yeah, there are problems with this, with vaccines or these other drugs. They will never do that today. The result is a public information landscape where critical perspectives on pharmaceutical products and purchased foods rarely receive mainstream attention. Kennedy's vision for reforming HHS begins with fundamentally recalibrating the agency's mission. We're reorganizing the agency to consolidate these things. One is to eliminate redundancy and streamline the agency. Most importantly, to redirect and recalibrate its course so that everybody there knows that every day, if you want your job, you've got to wake up in the morning and be thinking, how am I going to end the chronic disease epidemic today? This mission-driven approach represents a dramatic departure from the status quo. Specific reforms include purging conflicts of interest throughout his HHS agencies, dedicating approximately 20% of NIH's $46 billion budget to replicating studies rather than just funding new research, publishing peer reviews for the first time to increase transparency, creating new in-house scientific journals for each NIH institute rather than relying on corrupted commercial journals, ending the FDA's war against alternative medicine, including stem cells, peptides, and nutritional approaches. And finally, reforming the GRAS pathway to close the loophole, allowing industry self-approval of food additives. One of Kennedy's most significant policy shifts involves ending what he calls the war on the FDA against alternative medicine. The war on stem cells, the war on Chile, the war on peptides, the war on anything that is not going to make big pharma money. Kennedy's position reflects a philosophical shift in how government should approach health freedom. Our position is that the FDA has a job, which is to do the science on these kinds of issues and then tell the public what they've learned from the science, but not tell the people and not tell physicians what they can and cannot prescribe. This doesn't mean abandoning safety standards or creating a wild west of unregulated treatments. Instead, it means respecting individual autonomy while ensuring access to accurate information. We want to make sure that information is out there, but we also want to respect the intelligence of the American people. Kennedy's approach has generated both support and skepticism within the medical community. Former CDC Director Dr. Tom Frieden acknowledges there are some things that RFK Jr. gets right. We have a chronic disease crisis in this country, but we must avoid simplistic solutions and stick with the science. Dr. Randall Stafford of Stanford School of Medicine is optimistic. I'm excited by this idea of addressing the root causes of chronic diseases, but I'm not sure that those goals are consistent with other goals to deregulate the economy. Kennedy's focus on ultra-processed foods and corporate influence has garnered support across political lines. Even critics of his more controversial positions acknowledge the validity of his concerns about the food system and regulatory capture. The stakes are immense. The statistics Kennedy cites paint a stark picture for Americans' health crisis. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States had 16% of global COVID deaths, despite having only 4.2% of the world's population. Americans are losing over 100,000 young people annually to drug overdoses. For perspective, during the 20-year Vietnam War, 56,000 American lives were lost. The country now spends approximately $1.7 trillion annually on chronic diseases, representing about 90% of the healthcare budget. Kennedy frames the mission morally. A healthy person has 1,000 dreams. A sick person only has one. And right now, 60% of the people in the country have only a single dream. His vision extends beyond individual health to national potential. Our country cannot achieve its promises of being an exemplary nation and the promise of giving everybody who lands here the American dream, the potential to fulfill their own potential, if they're sick all the time. Kennedy's ultimate goal transcends partisan politics. He aims to restore something America once possessed but has since lost: global trust in American regulatory integrity. When I was a kid, NIH was the gold standard science agency in the world. The FDA was a gold standard regulator. And same for me here. The reputation is so strong that many newly independent countries in Africa and elsewhere wrote into their constitutions that if the FDA approved something, it would automatically be approved in their country. There was this broad faith in American science and American regulatory integrity at that point around the world. Kennedy observes that no longer exists. His 4-year mission is clear. What we want to do over the next 4 years is restore global faith in American regulatory integrity. The stakes couldn't be higher for a nation spending trillions on healthcare while achieving third world outcomes. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and share this and leave a comment. Thank you very much.